Most people think negative thinking is just being realistic, that it's a sober assessment of what might go wrong, what could fail, what's broken. We tell ourselves we're just preparing for the worst, that we're being cautious, smart. But the truth is, most of our negative thoughts aren't rooted in fact. They're habits, repeated patterns, reflexes we've trained without even realizing it. See, the brain is a magnificent storyteller, and its favorite audience is you. From a young age, we start absorbing ideas about ourselves from what we hear, what we experience, and what we interpret, especially in moments of stress. A missed goal becomes, I'm not good enough. A moment of silence in a conversation becomes, they think I'm stupid. One failure turns into, this always happens to me. And once those thoughts are repeated enough times, they no longer feel like assumptions. They feel like facts. But they're not facts. They're not objective truths about who you are. They're just mental grooves you've worn deep by walking the same path over and over again. That's what a habit is. And the more you rehearse those thoughts, I'm not enough, I'm going to fail, I'll never get this right, the more familiar they become. And the brain doesn't resist familiarity, it craves it. Because familiarity feels safe, it feels comfortable. Even when it's destructive. That's the great irony of negative thinking. It feels like safety. It pretends to protect us. If I expect disappointment, I won't be disappointed. If I criticize myself first, then no one else's words can hurt me. If I predict failure, then success becomes a bonus, not an expectation. And so we justify it, we normalize it, we make it our default. And over time, it becomes not just a way of thinking, it becomes a way of living. But here's the problem. When you treat every passing doubt as truth, you give it power. You begin to build your identity around it, and that is dangerous. Imagine a young musician constantly telling herself she's not talented enough. That thought started somewhere, maybe a harsh critique, maybe a moment of comparison, but instead of challenging that thought, she repeats it. Over time, she believes it. She stops practicing, she skips auditions, she avoids sharing her work, not because she's not talented, but because she believes she's not. A belief born not of reality, but of repetition. This is how lives shrink, not because people lack ability or opportunity, but because they allow their internal narrative to shrink their vision. It's not the outer world that limits them. It's the voice in their head, quietly whispering, you can't, over and over until it becomes a soundtrack playing in the background of everything they do. And if you think this is just about individuals, think again. This habit of negativity shows up in teams and companies and cultures. When leaders expect failure, when teammates assume the worst, when organizations fear change, those are not just strategic decisions, they're habits. Habits rooted in years of reacting to mistakes with blame instead of learning, with fear instead of curiosity. And those habits, just like individuals, kill growth. Now, here's the good news. Habits can be broken. But it doesn't start with force, it starts with awareness. The first step to killing your negative thinking is to recognize that it is just that. Thinking. Not prophecy, not identity, not fate, just thoughts. Thoughts you can observe, interrupt, and replace. This takes practice because the mind doesn't like letting go of the familiar. You might start by simply noticing when the script starts playing, this will never work. I'm not qualified. Why even try? Catch the thought in the act, give it a name, call it what it is, a loop, a pattern, a habit, and then ask the most important question. Is this true? Or is this just familiar? That question changes everything. Because truth has evidence. Truth stands up to scrutiny. But familiarity just feels comfortable. It feels old, worn in, like an old pair of shoes that don't support your feet anymore, but you keep wearing because they're easy. To replace a habit, you need a new one, not just positive thinking, purposeful thinking. Thinking rooted in possibility, in vision, in belief. Not delusion. It's not about pretending things are perfect. It's about choosing to believe that progress is possible, that you are capable, that setbacks are lessons, not labels, that your worth isn't defined by your worst days. I've seen this transformation firsthand in people, in teams, in leaders. The shift is subtle but powerful. It starts when someone says, "What if I'm wrong about myself?" That's not arrogance. That's courage. The courage to admit that the story you've been telling yourself might not be the whole story. That maybe, just maybe, there's more to you than your doubts are willing to admit. And once that door opens, even a crack, you begin to walk a new path. One that doesn't deny fear, but doesn't bow to it either. One that recognizes negative thinking for what it is, a habit. And like any habit, it loses its grip the moment you stop feeding it. So if you're going to repeat anything, repeat the truth that you are not your thoughts. You are the thinker of your thoughts. And that means you have the power to choose which ones get to stay. That's not inspiration. That's not hype. That's reality. You don't need to kill your negative thoughts with force. You kill them by starving them, by refusing to give them your belief, your attention, your loyalty, because belief is fuel, and what you feed grows. Feed the thoughts that serve you, starve the ones that don't. It really is that simple. Not easy, but simple. And everything changes when you start there. We like to think we're rational creatures, that our thoughts are the result of careful analysis, objective reasoning, and logical conclusions. But more often than not, the mind doesn't operate based on logic. It operates based on patterns. What you tell it often enough, it starts to believe, not because it's true, not because it's proven, but because it's familiar. This is both the greatest danger and the greatest opportunity you'll ever have. Because repetition is the mechanism of belief. Whether it's true or false, uplifting or destructive, repeated thoughts become accepted thoughts. And once a thought is accepted, it starts to shape how you see the world and, more importantly, how you see yourself. Now, this is why a child told they're not smart again and again starts to believe it, even if they're brilliant. This is why someone who constantly tells themselves they're unlucky begins to see misfortune everywhere. They're not cursed. They're not broken. Their mind is simply doing its job, filtering reality through the lens it's been trained to wear. The mind has no moral compass. It doesn't check your thoughts for accuracy or fairness. It checks for frequency. Think something enough times and it becomes the lens through which everything else is interpreted. This is how biases are formed. Not just social or cultural ones, personal ones. Biases against our own potential, biases against our own abilities. And we don't even realize it's happening because it feels so normal. Let me put it simply, the mind is like a garden and repetition is the water. Water a thought daily, whether it's a weed or a flower, and it will grow. And once it grows, it spreads. One negative belief doesn't stay isolated. It creeps into other areas. I'm bad at public speaking becomes, I'm bad with people. But it doesn't stop there. Because beliefs drive behavior. What you believe shapes what you attempt, what you pursue, what you dare to try. If your mind has been rehearsing failure for years, even the smallest challenge becomes intimidating. The brain says, why try? You know how this ends. And if you listen to that voice long enough, you stop trying altogether. Not because you can't succeed, but because you've rehearsed failure so often that it feels inevitable. That's the scary part. But here's the liberating truth. Repetition works both ways. You can use the exact same mechanism, the same mental wiring, to build belief instead of break it, to strengthen courage instead of fear, to grow resilience instead of insecurity. But it takes intentionality, because positive repetition doesn't happen by accident. Negative thoughts are often triggered by fear, stress, or old wounds. They sneak in, but empowering thoughts, those you have to choose. You have to speak them, write them, practice them. This isn't about fluffy affirmations or empty motivation. This is about neuroplasticity, the science-backed reality that your brain is always learning, always rewiring itself. And when you consistently repeat thoughts of capability, growth, or purpose, your brain starts building new connections. It starts reinforcing new pathways. And eventually those thoughts begin to feel natural, even automatic. This is why the most powerful thing you can do isn't to eliminate all negative thinking. That's impossible. The goal is to dilute it with better input, to outnumber it, to surround yourself with repetition that reinforces what you want to believe, not because you're delusional, but because you're designing your mental environment with intention. Think about an athlete before a competition. They don't say, I hope I don't mess up. They visualize success. They speak belief. They repeat mantras, routines, even gestures that trigger focus and confidence. Why? Because they understand that performance begins in the mind. And if the mind is trained to expect failure, the body will often follow. But if the mind is trained to expect strength, courage, and clarity, the body rises to match it. The same principle applies in everyday life. If you constantly say, I'm bad with people, you'll behave in ways that reinforce that belief. You'll avoid eye contact, you'll hold back in conversations, and then when people respond with distance, you'll say, see, I was right. But that's not confirmation, that's self-fulfilling prophecy. You weren't seeing reality, you were recreating it based on what your mind had rehearsed. Now, imagine flipping the script. Imagine saying, I'm learning to connect better with people. It's not a lie, it's a direction, a guiding statement. And the more you repeat it, the more you'll start to notice opportunities to grow in that area. You'll catch yourself being just a little more open, a little more present, a little more confident. And those moments build. Repetition leads to belief. Belief leads to behavior. And behavior creates new outcomes. This is not about perfection. You'll still have doubts. You'll still have moments where old thoughts sneak back in. But the difference is you'll know what to do with them. You'll recognize that they're not truth. They're echoes. Old tracks still playing on a loop. And you'll have the tools to change the track. That's the real power. Not in silencing every negative thought, but in refusing to amplify it. In choosing day after day to speak belief louder than doubt. To practice the mindset that supports the life you want to build. Because here's the bottom line. Your mind believes what you repeat. So make sure you're repeating something worth believing. And if you've spent years rehearsing the wrong script, that's okay. Start writing a new one. One sentence at a time, one decision at a time, one belief at a time. It's not about being perfect, it's about being intentional. You are training your mind, whether you realize it or not. The only question is, what are you training it to believe? Make that answer count. Negative thinking is seductive. It comes dressed as logic, cloaked in caution, pretending to be helpful. And on the surface, it even sounds responsible. It says, don't try that, you might fail. It whispers, be careful. Don't get your hopes up. It tells you, stay where it's safe. Don't risk what you already have. And because those voices sound protective, we trust them. We think they're keeping us grounded. But what they're really doing is keeping us stuck. See, negative thinking often isn't about facts or probability. It's about fear. Fear of failure, fear of embarrassment, fear of loss. And rather than confront that fear directly, the mind dresses it up in rationality. We call it being practical. We say we're just being realistic. But more often than not, it's just fear in disguise. It's important to understand this because fear has a job to do, and it's very good at that job. Fear exists to keep us alive, to protect us from threats. And in a world of predators and danger, fear kept our ancestors from wandering too far or making foolish risks. But the threats we face today aren't saber-toothed tigers, they're rejection, judgment, uncertainty, emotional risks, not physical ones. And yet, our brains haven't fully evolved to tell the difference. Fear still rings the alarm bells loud and clear. So what happens? Every time you consider doing something bold, different, or unfamiliar, starting a new project, speaking up in a meeting, launching that idea you've had in your head for years, fear pulls the emergency brake. It sends a signal, danger ahead. And negative thinking kicks in to support the fear. What if you failed? What if people laugh? What if you lose everything? And here's the twist. Fear isn't lying to you. It's just not telling the whole truth. Yes, you could fail. Yes, you might get criticized. Yes, you may feel uncomfortable. But none of that is fatal. None of it defines you. Fear doesn't know how to weigh context. It only knows how to scream, stop. And if we listen to it without question, we become prisoners in our own minds, mistaking self-protection for wisdom. There's a deeper problem here. The more we listen to that voice, the quieter our other voice becomes. The one that says try, the one that says grow, the one that dreams. Because make no mistake, every time you obey fear-driven thinking, you reinforce it. You teach your brain, this is the safe route, let's stay here. And like a well-worn trail in a forest, that mental path becomes easier to walk, more automatic, harder to break. This is how people become trapped. Not by their circumstances, but by their mindset. A person with all the resources in the world, but a fear-based mindset, can live a very small life. Meanwhile, someone with almost nothing but the courage to challenge their fear can build something extraordinary. Because fear isn't the barrier, our belief in it is. You've seen it in others. The colleague who always has great ideas but never speaks up. The friend who dreams of starting a business but stays in a job they hate. The student who's brilliant but never applies themselves because they're afraid of not being good enough. In each of these stories, fear is doing its job, trying to protect, but it's doing it too well. It's protecting them not just from harm, but from growth, from change, from life. But what if we began to see fear differently? What if we stopped treating it like a red light and started treating it like a signal, a sign that we're on the edge of something that matters? Because here's what's true. Fear always shows up where there's potential. It doesn't waste its energy on things that don't matter. Fear shows up when the stakes are real. And that's not a reason to back down. It's a reason to pay attention. So the most courageous people aren't fearless. They just don't let fear sit in the driver's seat. They hear it, they acknowledge it, but they don't obey it. Because they know that the cost of listening to fear is higher than the risk of acting in spite of it. The cost is your potential, your joy, your sense of purpose. Now, this isn't just about personal growth, it's about leadership too. Leaders who let fear drive decisions often end up creating cultures of hesitation, teams that are afraid to speak up, organizations that avoid innovation. Because when leaders operate from fear of losing control, fear of failing in public, fear of making the wrong call, they start managing to not lose instead of managing to win. But leadership isn't about avoiding risk, it's about navigating it with clarity and courage. It's about being the kind of person who can feel fear and still move forward. The kind of person who recognizes negative thinking not as a warning, but as a mirror, reflecting the parts of us that are scared, uncertain, or vulnerable, and choosing to act anyway. That choice is where everything changes. Because when you stop giving fear the final say, you start to reclaim your agency. You stop seeing negative thoughts as commands and start treating them as data, useful for analysis, but not for decision making. You can hear the voice that says, what if it doesn't work? And respond, yes, but what if it does? And when you respond like that enough times, something powerful happens. The brain starts to recalibrate. It starts to associate fear not just with danger, but with opportunity, not just with threat, but with transformation. And the habit of negative thinking begins to unravel, not because you fought it with force, but because you stopped believing its disguise. So the next time that voice pops up, the one that says you're not ready, or you're not good enough, or it's not the right time, pause and ask, is this fear speaking, and is it protecting me from harm or from growth? Because protection and paralysis often feel the same in the moment, but only one moves you forward. The goal isn't to eliminate fear. It's to stop giving it authority over your choices. Because on the other side of fear is not just freedom, it's your future. And that's worth fighting for. Negative thinking doesn't look like avoidance. It doesn't look like hiding. It doesn't wave its hands and scream, I'm distracting you. It's much more subtle than that. It feels like analysis. It feels like preparation. It feels like you're being smart. But often what it really is avoidance in disguise. And what it distracts you from, what it shields you from, is your own responsibility. See, when we fall into negative thought patterns, this will never work, I'm not good enough, they probably won't like it. We tell ourselves we're just being realistic. But realism isn't the issue. The real issue is that those thoughts often let us off the hook. They relieve us of the pressure to act, to try, to own the outcome. Because if failure is inevitable, why take responsibility? If you're convinced something won't work, why bother trying to fix it? Negative thinking becomes a defense, a wall. It protects the ego from the sting of trying and falling short. It keeps you from having to risk your identity, your pride, your confidence. And so we use it, sometimes even unconsciously, as a tool to escape accountability, not because we're lazy or incapable, but because responsibility is uncomfortable. It demands effort. Vulnerability, and yes, but the trade-off is enormous. Because when you hand your power to negative thinking, you're not just avoiding pain, you're avoiding possibility. You're stepping out of the game before it even begins. You're distracting yourself from what could be done, could be changed, could be grown, if only you were willing to carry the weight of trying. This happens in small, ordinary ways. A person doesn't apply for the job they want because they're not qualified enough. But they haven't actually asked, they haven't reached out, they haven't tried to bridge the gap, they've just assumed rejection and let that assumption justify inaction. Or a leader sees their team disengaged, and instead of asking hard questions about culture, communication, vision, they chalk it up to people these days. Negative thinking becomes a scapegoat, a way to avoid responsibility for influence. This mindset is not just personal, it's systemic. It spreads like wildfire in teams and organizations. When teams repeatedly say, that won't work here, or we've tried that before, or people won't go for it, what they're really doing is choosing comfort over accountability. Because if you already believe something is doomed, you don't have to own the effort of changing it. You don't have to do the hard work of being responsible for outcome. You get to feel smart and safe at the same time. But here's the problem. Leadership, real leadership, requires responsibility, not just for results, but for the energy you bring into the room, for the thoughts you speak aloud, for the story you tell your team. Every time you default to negative thinking, you're not just commenting on reality, you're shaping it. You're creating a narrative that either mobilizes people or paralyzes them. And that's a choice, responsibility. The same applies to your personal growth. If you constantly think, I'll never be good at this, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Not because it's true, but because you've chosen to believe it instead of taking responsibility for improving. You've used negative thinking to protect yourself from the burden of showing up every day and doing the work, the real work, of practicing, learning, failing, adjusting. That work is heavy. It demands ownership, and negative thinking lets you set it down. But here's what people miss. Taking responsibility doesn't mean blaming yourself when things go wrong. It doesn't mean shame. It means responsibility, the ability to respond, the power to make a different choice, to act in the face of uncertainty, to influence your situation, even when the odds are unclear. That's what negative thinking steals from you, takes away your sense of agency, and it gives you back a story, a comforting, familiar, self-limiting story that says, this is just how it is. But it's not how it is, it's just how it feels, and feelings are not always facts, they are signals. And when negative thoughts show up, they are often pointing to a deeper truth, that there's something we're afraid to own, some outcome we don't want to be responsible for, some failure we don't want to face. But here's the irony. The moment you stop distracting yourself with all the reasons something might not work and actually take responsibility for making it work, something powerful happens. You shift from a passive observer to an active participant. You stop asking, what if I fail? And start asking, what can I do to increase the chance of success? You stop predicting doom and start creating strategy. And strategy always beats speculation. Responsibility is where change begins, always. And not just when things are going well. The true test is when the odds are stacked, when the fears are loud, when the path is unclear. That's when negative thinking comes knocking. And that's when your responsibility becomes your anchor. Not to be certain, not to be perfect, but to engage with clarity, with effort, and with ownership. And that kind of mindset changes everything, because once you choose to take responsibility, negative thinking loses its grip. It becomes background noise, not the director of the play. It's still there, sure, it always will be, but it no longer gets to run the show. You do, because here's the truth, you are responsible for the story you repeat. You are responsible for the thoughts you feed. You are responsible for the choices you make, even when fear wants to make them for you. That responsibility is not a burden, it's your power. And when you embrace it, when you own it fully, consistently, courageously, you don't just silence negativity, you outgrow it. Because you've stopped giving it your time, your energy, and your belief. And that's when real progress begins. There's a moment that happens in all of us. It doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't come with some dramatic turning point. It's quiet. It's subtle. And that's what makes it so dangerous. It's the moment when your courage dies, not all at once, but in pieces. And what kills it isn't failure. It isn't criticism. It isn't rejection. It's negative thinking. Persistent, internal, convincing negativity that whispers so often and so convincingly that you start to believe it. That's how courage dies, one thought at a time. Courage isn't something you're born with. It's something you build. It's a muscle. And like any muscle, it has to be used, tested, challenged. And yet, most people let theirs atrophy, not because they're weak, but because they feed their fear more than their faith. They practice doubt more than belief. They rehearse worst-case scenarios more than best-case outcomes. And over time, without even noticing, their inner world becomes a place where courage can't survive. That's the cost of negative thinking. It doesn't just distort your perception, it rewires your relationship with risk, with effort, with hope. It teaches you to shrink, to second-guess, to hesitate. It trains you to sit back when you should lean in. And once you've rehearsed that long enough, it starts to feel like wisdom, like maturity, like realism. But it's not. It's fear. And fear, if left unchecked, will always ask you to stay small. Here's what makes it harder. Negative thinking doesn't announce itself as the enemy. It shows up with a clipboard and a checklist. It looks like planning. It sounds like, let's just be careful, or what if it all goes wrong? And yes, planning and prudence have their place. But when those questions dominate every choice, when they become the loudest voice in the room, they're no longer serving you. They're protecting your comfort at the expense of your courage. Comfort feels good. We all crave it, but nothing meaningful happens there. Every great idea, every leap forward, every act of leadership or creativity or growth, it started with someone choosing courage over comfort. Someone who heard the doubts, felt the fear, faced the uncertainty, and still moved forward. They didn't wait for the doubts to disappear. They acted anyway. That's the truth most people miss. Courage isn't the absence of negative thoughts, it's the refusal to be ruled by them. Because courage dies when you keep feeding the belief that you're not good enough, that your ideas don't matter, that you'll never make it. And those beliefs, they don't start from failure, they start from repetition. From allowing negative thinking to speak every day without being challenged. That's the slow poison. You don't notice it at first, but over time, it corrodes your initiative, your willingness to try, your belief in your own ability to make a difference. And it doesn't just impact you, it spreads. Because courage is contagious, but so is fear. When a leader operates from negativity, their team begins to do the same. When a parent models hesitation and self-doubt, their children absorb that language. And when a friend continually speaks the language of defeat, the people around them begin to lower their own expectations too. You don't just kill your own courage, you quietly, subtly kill the courage of the people around you. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine what happens when you decide to kill negative thinking instead. Not deny it, not pretend it doesn't exist, but recognize it for what it is and choose not to feed it. Imagine replacing I could fail with I might learn something. Imagine swapping I'm not ready with I'm willing to grow into this. That simple shift doesn't erase fear, but it does silence its dominance. It creates space for courage to breathe again. This is what real transformation looks like. It's not loud, it's not flashy, it's the quiet, daily decision to choose thought patterns that support courage rather than destroy it. It's catching the self-sabotage in real time. It's noticing the old tape playing in your head and deciding to change the station. It's replacing the loop of why me with why not me And over time, those decisions add up. You recondition your mindset. They strengthen the neural pathways of resilience, of optimism, of hope. And that's not fluff, that's neuroscience. Your brain literally rewires based on what you practice. So if you've been practicing fear, your brain will become very efficient at fear. But if you start practicing courage, even in small, imperfect ways, it will begin to change. Slowly, consistently. Lovely. Here's the most liberating part. You don't have to feel courageous to act courageously. You just have to decide. Courage isn't an emotion, it's a commitment. It's the decision to show up in spite of the emotion, and the more you make that decision, the more it becomes who you are. Not just something you do once in a while. There will always be reasons not to. The negative thoughts will never fully disappear. They'll show up in new forms, in new seasons, with new disguises. But they only have power when you give them your attention, your belief, your repetition. The moment you stop feeding them, they shrink. They lose momentum. And in that space, courage returns. So yes, kill your negative thinking. Not because it's wrong 100% of the time, but because it's a terrible master. Because if you give it the wheel, it will drive your life into smallness, into stagnation, into regret. And the world doesn't need more people playing small. It needs people willing to be bold, to take the risk, to stand up, to speak up, to try. Courage is what builds businesses. It's what repairs relationships. It's what drives change in teams, families, communities. But only if it's alive, only if it's being fed more than fear. You already have it in you. You always did. You just have to protect it, guard it, nurture it. And the first step in doing that is simple. Stop rehearsing the thoughts that kill it. Kill your negative thinking before it kills your courage. Because your courage, and he said that's where everything starts.